Now, this movie came out in 2007, and ever since it came out, it's been one of my personal favorite horror movies of all time. But whenever I went back to re-watch it to make this video, I thought I was losing my mind, because the ending I specifically remember is not the one I saw. So I start thinking it must be an alternate ending, so I go to YouTube, I look up other alternate endings for 1408, and I found them. And the other one that I watched wasn't the ending that I remembered either. Luckily for me, I have my original copy from 2007 that I could go and watch and see what I remembered. Because I know I'm not crazy. I know what happens at the end of this movie. At least I thought I did. But before we get to all of the crazy endings that this movie has, we have to go through the craziness that is this movie, 1408. It's all based off of a Stephen King story by the same name about an author named Mike Enslin. And we find out that he's a paranormal investigator of sorts that likes to travel all over, staying in the most haunted of places, and then writing books about the top 10 scariest hotels.
10 haunted graveyards. 10 haunted lighthouses.
But we actually find out that he hasn't always written these horror books whenever a lady comes up to him at a book signing and asks him to sign his first thing that he ever wrote, The Long Road Home. He seems quite surprised whenever she brings this book out, and then he quickly dodges questions whenever she asks if the relationship that happens in the book between a father and son was based on his own experiences in life. It seems clear that this interaction strikes a chord with him because he goes to clear his head for a little bit and nearly dies at the very beginning of the movie.
You okay, buddy? Are you breathing?
But he must be alright because he's not worried about it, and he goes to pick up the mail where he receives something from the Dolphin Hotel that says, "Don't enter room 1408," where he then proceeds to write down all of the numbers and add them up, and they come out to 13.
That's cute.
The amount of stuff that has to do with weird numbers and the way that they add up with this movie just makes my head hurt. Here's just a few examples of things that add up to 13. Of course, the room 1408 adds up to 13. So the room itself is on the 14th floor, which is actually just the 13th floor, but it was renamed 14th because it's bad luck to have a 13th floor. The address of the hotel is 2254 Lexington Street in New York, and of course 2254 adds up. You get the idea. Basically, the number 13 was really important in the book, and so they threw little Easter eggs all into the movie. But with the postcard is the only time they actually pointed out. All right, thanks. Love you, bye. So with his mind made up, he calls the Dolphin Hotel to make reservations to stay in the room 1408, where he's quickly told that the room is unavailable.
I didn't tell you which date.
And after being completely shut down, he ends up calling his lawyer to ask them to look into some stuff to see if this is even legal, which it turns out that it's not. Shows up later that day to talk to the head manager about the room, where the manager, Gerald Olin, played perfectly by Samuel L. Jackson, brings him into his office and tries his hardest to persuade him from staying in this evil, evil room.
My training is as a manager, not a coroner.
34. Self-inflicted deaths that have happened in 1408 is not even enough to make Mike think twice about staying in the room. But whenever Olin brings up the 22 natural deaths that have happened in the room, this gives him some pause. From strokes to heart attacks to even a drowning,
Miller drowned in his chicken soup.
That's hard to do.
the total of 56 deaths that have happened in this one hotel room makes Mike think for a little bit, and then he still decides that he wants to stay in the room. Olin, seeing that there's nothing more that he can say or do, he decides to take the elevator with Mike up to the room, where he doesn't even get out on the floor because he doesn't want to get any closer to the room than what he has to.
Please, don't do this.
As Mike begins to walk down the hallway to his room, he seems rather distracted, looking at the folder of all the different desks, and then seemingly as though he has walked in a full circle, he's back at the elevator, as though the hotel itself is trying to give him one more chance to turn and leave. Of course, he doesn't do that, so he goes over to the room, he unlocks the door, and it's exactly what you would expect, and it's actually a very nice room.
This is it.
It's even got little chocolates on the pillow, and of course the Bible in the nightstand. He sits down, looks around at some of the paintings, and is just not impressed or scared at all.
It's just a room.
All the while recording his thoughts into his tape recorder, and even talking about the streets below and the view that he has from this very common room, until he's completely caught off guard by this. Ever since I watched this movie, this song is always going to scare me. There's nothing I can do about it. It's just creepy is all it is now. But as the skeptic that he is, it doesn't bother him at all. He logically believes that there is somebody else in the room and goes his way to try to find them.
A ghost that offers turn-down service.
He doesn't find anybody in the room, but what he does find is that the thermostat is broken. So he calls down to the front desk to explain to them that it is hot
The room's on fire.
and he needs somebody to come up and fix it. And they send somebody up. And when he gets there, Mike goes to open the door, but it's stuck, as though the room doesn't want him to leave. Finally, though, he gets the door open, but the technician is not coming into this room because he knows better. Instead, he just explains to Mike how to fix it, and before he can even give him a tip, the technician has already left. But at this moment, whenever Mike is standing in the hallway, I'm just screaming at the TV, just go, just leave your stuff, leave the door open, block it open with something, and get out of this place. He doesn't do that because he doesn't believe in ghosts or demons or anything like that, and just wanders back into the room like everything's hunky-dory. I guess luckily it's not hot anymore. And to celebrate that fact, he grabs his bottle of bourbon and goes to sit down on the bed where the creepiest song ever comes back on. The clock then changes into a 60-minute timer because, as he was told by Olin,
Nobody lasts more than an hour.
still, he tries to shrug this off like it's no big deal and then realizes he can't hear anything anymore. Sticking his head out the window so that way he can yell at somebody or see if he can hear any of the cars down below, and whenever he does, it scares him, causing the window to fall down to cut his hand really bad, where then, even whenever he goes to wash the blood, he gets burnt by the sink, making it very clear that not all of this is in his head. Then after dealing with this wound, whenever he returns back to the bedroom, of course, the stupid song comes back on again.
We've only just begun.
Not stupid. I mean, the Carpenters are pretty good, but it's just scary because we've only just begun. To deal with the clock, he rips it out of the wall, throws it across the room, which causes the phone to ring. Whenever he picks it up, they tell him that his sandwich will be up shortly, which of course he starts to yell that he's hurt and he would like to talk to the manager, which just never happens. I mean, he did try to warn him. He tried really hard to warn him. He didn't listen. And so sadly, he goes to run out of the room, but there's no escaping this room. The door is locked from not even the outside. It's just locked forever. He's not leaving. He notices a guy directly across from him in the building next to him. And he figures, if I can't get any help from in here, I'll get help from the guy across the street. This is when it starts to get really weird because they're moving the exact same way. And in a very smart move, Mike grabs the lamp next to him and holds it up to his face so he can see the face of the man across the street. And not only does he see his own face, but he also sees somebody sneaking up behind him to attack. That's exactly what is happening in his own room. Falling down to the ground, there's nothing. It's just all in his head. Clearly, at this point, he's got to be hallucinating all of this. And the only thing that makes sense is the bottle of bourbon that was given to him by Olin must have been drugged.
He dosed me. It was the booze with the chocolate.
And then the TV pops on where he sees a familiar scene that was actually a home movie of his with himself, his wife, and his daughter. This here is one of my absolute favorite parts because when Katie gets up close to the camera, it's as though she's looking into it to see him in the room. He's visibly shaken from this and realizes he has to get out of this room somehow. So he decides that it's going to be the window. Whenever he climbs out the window, he makes it very clear, even into his own tape recorder, that if he slips and falls, it wasn't on purpose. It was 100% an accident.
Rome did not win.
But the room's not gonna let him go that easy. And even after being almost scared off the ledge by the lady jumping again, he makes it safely back inside, where he tries to take comfort in the room for just a moment until he sees a familiar scene of his daughter in a hospital bed. As things begin to click into place for us that his daughter didn't make. And at this point, the room is not only using psychological horror, but is also changing its own physical characteristics. It's no longer in the same spot, and it's starting to get very cold. And at this point, Mike has finally realized that he needs to contact somebody outside. Remembering that he has a cell phone, as well as his computer, he finally gets a hold of his wife, Lily, and tries to talk to her. But after their daughter died, they haven't talked in like a year. Mike just up and left, so Lily doesn't really have any time for him.
I'm gonna get some cigarettes, okay?
It's not until he says that you need to call the cops and send them to the Dolphin Hotel that it catches her attention that he is actually back in New York. And while he's begging her just to call for help and get him out of this room, of course, the sprinklers have to come on and just mess up everything. So he only has one option left, and that is somehow escape this room. And luckily, he's seen Die Hard because he realizes that he can climb through the air ducts. He hops up there and he begins to crawl. He sees a familiar scene of his past life with his wife and young daughter. But of course, the room can't have him just thinking on good thoughts from his past. It has to scare him in some way. Something that absolutely scared me even today. And luckily he makes it away and falls back into the room, and there is absolutely nowhere that he can go anymore. As soon as he hits the ground, he decides that he needs more alcohol, opening the fridge to see the manager. Where Olin begins to explain, you might not believe in any ghost, and you might not believe in spirits, but you've definitely broken a lot of spirits. And Mike, being as crazy as he is, just starts to yell, what do you want from me?
What do you want from me?
With the room getting colder and colder and him just trying to stay warm, even making a fire in the middle of all of the snow, he begins to think back on all of his memories.
Daddy, everyone dies.
And just when it seems like there's no hope left, he begins to hear his wife's voice again coming from his computer, where he crawls over and tries to talk to her again, but she's asking, where are you? Because she called the cops.
Mike, they're in 1408. The room's empty.
So she says that she can come to the room and check on him, but he looks over at the clock and sees that there's not enough time for her to make it there anyway. But instead of him saying that, it seems that the room has also taken over his computer and tells her, yes, please come, don't talk to anybody, just come straight to room 1408. And then everything starts to go crazy whenever the computer shuts down and the picture that was on the wall floods the entire room, so much so that it seems like he's drowning. And then he wakes up back on the beach, where he then passes out again and wakes up in the hospital where his wife Lily is sitting next to him, still being listed as his next of kin. And he begins to explain that he was in New York at the Dolphin Hotel, and she says, that never happened. So they go out to eat, talk about all of this. She suggests that he probably needs to write about these experiences that he had about 1408 in the Dolphin Hotel. And so he does, and even talks to his publishing company and tells them that he's almost done with the manuscript. And then we see him walking off to the post office to go and mail it. He puts it in the mail, and then we have a few guys enter into the post office and start to tear the walls down around him, revealing that it's not actually the post office, but he's still in the room. Being very upset, he begins to yell, I was out, and then in one of the most heart-wrenching scenes that I have seen as a parent, his daughter comes walking back in. He tries to claim that she's not real, but he ends up holding her anyway.
Don't you love me anymore? Let me stay.
Yes, they will.
Where she doesn't last, and he proclaims to the room, you can't take her away from me twice. Just when the timer on the radio hits 0 and the stupid song comes back on and she crumbles into dust, as he realizes the room has completely turned back to the way that it was when he entered. Now being completely broken, he receives a phone call, and whenever he answers, he just simply asks, why don't you just kill me? And the room begins to explain, that's not how it works. You have to do this yourself. And he exclaims, I'm not ready to leave, not yet.
Are you ready to check out, Mr. Enslin?
Right your way.
I understand.
The room even says,
your wife will be here soon.
and don't worry, we'll send her straight up. He tries to say she has nothing to do with this, leaving him only one option and one option only.
Even if you leave this room, you can never leave this room.
If he's going out, he's taking the room with him. So he walks over, begins to set everything on fire, one last time picking up his tape recorder and rewarding the Dolphin Hotel with a 10 out of 10 on the shiver scale.
I award the Dolphin 10 skulls.
falls into the floor in a laughing fit, knowing that he is not going alone. And it cuts over to the manager of the hotel, Mr. Oland, saying, "Well done, Mr. Enslin," because he also knows that he won in the end. Here's where everything gets weird, because the version that I watched, it just sort of caps it off there, and then it cuts over to his funeral. And I'm completely thrown off guard because I was positive that he made it out. But in the version that I was rewatching, he's being laid to rest next to his daughter. And then Mr. Olin shows up, bringing all of his stuff, but she doesn't want any of the stuff that was left over from the fire, because all of that's just going to bring bad memories back. So Mr. Olin gets back into his car, he sees the tape recorder, pulls it out, wonder if it works, begins to listen to it, of where he then begins to hear the voice of Mike's daughter talking to him in the room, and actually looks into the mirror and sees her far off, and whenever he begins to look closer, sees Mike in the back seat. All of it's not real, it just real scary for him, and then he drives off, and we cut back to see a ghost Mike in room 1408 fading off to be with Katie. But that's not what happened. That's not what I remember, so I look up alternate endings to figure out what actually happened, and I found some alternate endings. This has got to be the original ending that I remember seeing, and it still cuts to his funeral, or at least the voiceover, and then it's back at the office of his publisher, who sits down at his desk having received some mail, which is actually from Mike. And it's the exact package that he sent off whenever he was in the post office after having woke up in the hospital thinking that he had escaped the room and proceeded to write the book, even though he was still trapped in the room the whole time. Now, this ending had me scratching my head because I was like, I really don't know what's going on. Luckily, I still have my DVD copy, and the ending that I remember is on here. He wakes up in the hospital, he's there with his wife, they talk, they go out to eat, he makes sure that he is out of the room, and sure enough, he is. And he begins to write the book, and everybody is super impressed that he's writing it so quick, and he makes it clear, I've already done this once. And when him and Lily have seemed to reconnected after everything has happened, they sit down, she brings over a box of all the stuff from the fire, and sets it down before him where he pulls out the tape recorder. He then begins to play it and cuts to where Katie is talking to him. And it's clearly heard by him and Lily, where she proceeds to realize all of this actually happened.
I wish we could stay together. You, me, and Mommy.
Now what's even crazier than that is there's apparently a fourth ending that I haven't been able to find, where it's the exact same as what I just described, except when he plays the part on the tape recorder, she doesn't seem to notice Katie's voice on the tape recorder. So what happened? Why is there so many different endings, and why is it so confusing? Apparently, the original version that was shot is where he dies and Olin shows up at the funeral to give the box to Lily. But during test screenings, this one didn't do so well. So in the release that actually went to theaters, what they used was the one where he survived, which is the one that I remember. When they put out the DVDs, on the other hand, without telling literally anybody, they put it out there to where it was the one that he dies, because that was the director's favorite ending. And I'm assuming that the other version, where the publisher just receives the package, was just a random alternate ending that they had shot. I don't know, but all I know is that it's all fantastic. And of course, if I have to rate this out of 10, I gotta give it a 10. It's one of my personal favorites. It's fantastic. You need to go and watch it, and you need to be sure to watch all of the alternate endings. If you've seen 1408, let me know how you would rate it. If you have another movie that you want me to cover in the same way, let me know. Here's the last one that I did. Thank you for watching. Have an extra blessed day, and I'll see you in the next one.